Hello friends, I am Chevee. Welcome to my shed. How are you doing today? How's things where you are? How's life in your world? Things here are pretty good. Today was a work from home day, and we are still dealing with the scenario that happened recently. I kind of briefly talked about it. I'm not going to talk about it. Essentially, there was an incident at work that needs addressed, and there are a few tools that need to be created to address that situation. And I'm a programmer. That's what I do. And so we're working on a few options, but we're a very small team. There's 3 developers, essentially, that we maintain. It's hard to give an estimate. I would say 10 to 15 products that are in production, and that's including internal tools. But on top of that, some of these products have dozens, if not hundreds, of individual pieces that kind of stand on their own. They just, share a common login interface, or, are packaged with other things. So we support some large code bases, but also just some small tools that need to be tweaked from time to time. And I'm telling you this because it never ceases to amaze me when a developer, especially young guys, and that's kind of where I see this coming from, younger developers, like fresh out of college kind of people who are hip to the new thing and they want to try the new thing. And so we have some of these tools that are kind of usable, but are so over-engineered that it's basically impossible to use them at any functional level. And it can be, for a guy like me, I'm completely self-taught. Yeah, I can say that because, the only formal coding classes I had were University of Phoenix, and I don't know that we ever actually wrote code. We wrote pseudocode. I don't know that we ever actually wrote code. But even if we did, it was all self-paced, right? So I am a self-taught coder. Have been my whole life. I've learned, I started when I was very little. And part of that has carried forward. I started in the 80s. And so because of that, a lot of what I do now has carried forward from that. I'm not writing go-tos and that sort of thing. But, I'm writing very functional code that is very easy to follow. And I don't hide data inside of lots of different classes or whatever, because to me, that's just the most confusing possible way to write code. So anyway, the point is we have these applications that are 5 people are using it, but it was built as if it's going to be some enterprise level, the next greatest thing. So we have separate databases for these 5 people, and just these really confusing methodologies to get to the end. And I get it. I've talked about it before, that chances are that whatever framework you're using is completely unnecessary, because I can make a website faster, that does something simple. For instance, one of the things I'm working on right now is a messaging system. We're using a service, an outside service. It's just a simple API call, and send a couple curl requests, and that's it. And to look at the code that was previously written to handle this, it's a nightmare. It could literally be HTML page with no formatting, just a couple input fields and a go button that wraps an API, and that's it. And instead, we have to spin up, Docker and container and Laravel and Agile, and make sure we have the latest Bootstrap and jQuery, and to do what exactly? To send a curl request? I could write a command line script to do this in minutes, but instead we have to wade through kind of a disaster of a code base to figure out how this was done previously and whether we can salvage any of that or whether we just start from scratch. Don't like starting from scratch. We're not actually starting from scratch on that particular product. We're just going to kind of pull the pieces and stick it into one of our other internal tools that has some bits we already need. But man, I tell you what, it's been, but if nothing else, like as a developer, when you inherit something, this is the first time, this job is the first time I've ever inherited somebody else's code. Prior to this, everything I've ever worked on has been my code. I've never been a guy I've never worked on open source stuff. I've never worked on other people's products. I've always been my code. That, with some dabbling. I mean, I've dabbled in Minecraft, I've dabbled in WordPress, but everything I've done is my code. And so inheriting some of these code bases it's tough, you know? Like, as with everything, any skill that you'll develop, any art that you'll develop, there's 100 different ways of doing things. And sometimes in some of this code that I've had to look at, this person tried 5 different ways within the same code, and it's really confusing, really difficult to dig through. And we're trying to clean it up. And because of that, I enjoy the puzzle of looking through the code and figuring out how it works. And I enjoy building it out again, using the usable functions. You know, it's almost like new feature, even though it's not, which is always exciting. But, you know, today I hit some roadblocks in my coworker's code, who he just wasn't in the office yet, and I was trying to fix a few things. And it took me way too long to solve a really simple problem. And it's frustrating, but, you know, it's part of the job. Ultimately, though, I prefer to just write as plainly as possible. You know, I write my code like a children's book. Anybody could pick it up and read it and follow along. And unless I have, you know, a couple 100,000 concurrent users that I really need to worry about latency, optimizing is just a fool's game. Like, you're just pretending at that point. Those are my thoughts. Thank you for listening to them. Thank you for being here, as always. Thank you for leaving likes and comments, and thanks for hitting the subscribe button, all of you. I really appreciate you coming back. I really, really do. So thank you for doing that. I hope I'll see you again tomorrow. See you then.
Hey, Doc, wait! I want to ask you something.
Today's random fact comes from Wikipedia. What grain is used to make bourbon? The typical grain mixture for bourbon, known as the mash bill, is a minimum of 51% corn, with the remainder being wheat, rye, and or malted barley. A mash bill that contains wheat instead of rye produces what is known as a wheated bourbon.